General quarters, all hands remain in your battle stations.
The Man Battle Stations Podcast, the podcast of naval wargaming, with your hosts, Greg and Andy.
Ahoy there, and welcome to episode number 68 of the Man Battle Stations Podcast. My name is Greg, also known as Landlubber on the MBS forum.
And I'm Andy, also known as Ruck Dog on the forums. Greg, we are climbing back into the podcasting saddle after a long break, maybe a little longer than we had initially expected, I suppose.
Yes, and let me say welcome back to dry land, Andy.
Hey, I appreciate it. I have survived yet another deployment and probably another 20 or 30,000 or so miles steamed, and a few scenic port visits around the Mediterranean. And here we are.
So, okay, I'm going to put you on the spot. So after this cruise, how many miles do you think that you have covered by sea? If you had to guess, what do you think? Have you gotten to the moon and back yet, or what do you think?
It's probably right around 100,000 or so.
Okay. That's still quite a ways.
Which actually, that's a good long ways, although that's actually not a whole lot. Like the Truman herself, just on this one deployment, they did over 60,000 miles, but I was only there for half of it, right? So I didn't get the full 60,000 from that. No. And then, the other two deployments, I'm guesstimating they were roughly about that, about 30, 40,000. So yeah, maybe somewhere between 100 and 120,000, I would say, is probably about where it's at.
That's still plenty more than I've done. So many, many more than I've done. My only sea miles have been on a cruise ship. So
yeah. It's amazing how quick they can add up. So
yeah, definitely.
Well, Greg, since it's been such a long break, I mean, our last episode came out, all the way back in April, I guess, is when it hit the airwaves.
Probably, yeah.
This is going to be a little bit different from our usual hobby update and community SITREP episodes. Normally, when we do one of these episodes, we try and cover the entire period between that episode and the last one of those that we did. And given that it's been so long, 6 months or so, that's probably going to be a little impractical for us to do this time around. So instead, what we're going to try and do here is we're going to cherry pick some of the key highlights from the summer. And we're also going to sort of focus in a bit more on just the last month or so. In other words, we're going to pretend as if we had actually done one of these episodes back in September, even though we really didn't. But
yes.
Yeah. So that's probably going to be a little bit more efficiency, and we're going to do that instead of just a total blow-by-blow of the last 6 months, like I said.
Sounds like a plan.
Yep. And also, we do have a very special announcement to make, but we are going to save that for the end of the episode. So everybody sort of stay tuned for that.
Very good, Andy.
All right. Well, Greg, as is traditional, first up is the hobby update. What have you been playing and painting lately?
So on the playing side, not a whole lot. I did actually crack out Dystopian Wars, the old Spartan Games version, not the newfangled War Cradle version. So played a small-sized naval game and a small-sized land game a couple of weeks later, and then we were going to do a small-sized air game, but then I got COVID, and then work, and then real life, and then more work and real life. So that's kind of on the horizon for us to do the air game.
Very, very glad that you fully recovered, by the way. Glad to see
Thank you. Yes, thank you. I still have, it's still every once in a while in my throat, I feel something. I feel like I've got like a little bit of a tear almost or something like that. It's really weird, but for the most part, I'm not coughing anymore or anything. So.
And, in this modern day and age of the pandemic, every little case of sniffles you get, you either go, oh my God, is it COVID? Is it COVID?
Yes. So. Yeah, exactly.
Now, Greg, I do have a quick question for you about your Dystopian Wars game. Now, were you playing the 2.5 edition rules, or were you going back further than that?
Yeah, we were playing 2.5.
Okay.
Which is really very similar to 2.0. There's a couple of key differences, I think, but yeah, we played 2.5, but we were playing at like, I think the naval game was at like 650.
Okay. Yeah.
And the land game was a little bit smaller because these were like afternoon, like Monday afternoon pickup, not pickup game, but like a Monday afternoon game with a friend of mine here in the Springs. So we didn't want to do a big, huge thing. So, but yeah, it was good to get those models out there, especially the land game, because I've got still, even 10 years on or however long it's been, I've got very little experience with the land side of the Dystopian Wars. I got plenty of models for it. I just haven't played it very much. So.
Yeah, I have an entire like 12-gallon tote of shame of Dystopian Wars land stuff. So
there's some really cool models out there, I'll tell you. I was playing FSA, of course, for both of those, and my opponent was playing the République of France. So on the modeling side, I've been doing a little bit of Star Wars Legion. Real life has been very busy here recently. So I don't want to go too far into everything's fine. It's just been ridiculously busy. But I will show you something. This makes for great radio here when we show things, right? So, but Andy, I will show you this so you can see it and you can ooh and ah for all the listeners at home. So
okay, standing by.
And if anybody else wants to copy this idea, it seems to be working for me so far. And I would, obviously, if you have the materials to do it, I'd say go for it. So over the years, I have, and I'm going to go a little in depth into this because I'm very proud of how this turned out. Over the years, I have bought, God only knows how many pluck foam trays, because I seem to play the games and nobody makes actual formed foam for. There you go. You get my drift, right?
Yeah.
So I just resorted to pluck foam. I have 2 battle foam bags. I know some people have like 4, 5, 6, 10. I have 2. I have the very first one that I bought.
Battle foam can be addicting. I know that from experience.
Yes. I had the very first one that I bought when I first started playing tabletop war games. And Andy, you would recognize it if you saw it because you've seen it a million times. The one that my FSA gets carried around in, and I only use that for sentimental reasons. I only use that to carry my FSA. So if I'm playing Republic of France, if I'm playing another game, Legion, Oak and Iron, whatever, I don't use that bag. That bag is strictly for my FSA forces for Dystopian Wars. It's got the DW patch on it and everything. So about 7 or 8 years ago, 8 or 9 years ago, at Gamers Haven in the Springs, I bought a sword bag, a battle foam sword bag, which is a kind of a tall rectangular, pretty simple. It doesn't have the Molly system and everything on it. It's a pretty basic bag, but it meets my needs. And I just started buying pluck foam to make trays and to make things into the shapes that I needed for my games. Well, because I'm a pack rat when it comes to hobby stuff, I never threw any of the pluck foam away. And at this point, I've got enough pluck foam that I could probably train the U.S. gymnastic team in the box of pluck foam that I've got. So a few months ago, I thought to myself, I've got all this pluck foam laying around. I wonder if I could make my own trays. So I went to Home Depot, and let me hold on a second. Let me move the microphone over here. I went to Home Depot, and I went to the lumber section, to the hobby lumbers, where they have like the MDF and all of their stuff. And I was looking around to see what they had, and they have this stuff called hardboard. Essentially, it is like the stuff that makes up the back of a clipboard. So I'm showing it up to Andy, so Andy, you can see how thin it is. It's only like an eighth of an inch.
Tempered masonite. Yeah.
So it's got a smooth side and it's got a kind of a textured side. I took Elmer's wood glue and I measured out with a bunch of that pluck foam, and I started building my own trays.
Nice.
So a 2 foot by 4 foot section of that hardboard will yield 9 tray bottoms, for lack of a better term, 9 rectangles that fit in my sword bag. They're the right dimensions to fit in the sword bag. The Home Depot cuts it for free, and the hardboard is, I think a 2 by 4 section is like $7 or $8.
Oh yeah.
So wood glue I have found works just fine, and then I just take the foam and I glue it down. And I don't want to take the time. I have another tray over there. I could dig around to find it. It would take too long. Actually, hold on a second. It wouldn't take too long. I see it right there. So what I do basically is I'm very proud of how this worked out. I rarely have these creative flashes, and so when I do, I have to I have to capitalize on them. So basically, I kind of, take the foam and I kind of measure out where it's going to go, and then I just use the wood glue to glue it down. And there's, an infinite number of ways you can arrange this. And so let the record show I'm now holding this up so Andy can see all of my, where is it? There it is. All of my grunts for Halo
nice.
Ground Command. Yeah. And there they go.
Oh,
and
great.
And I mean, the thing is, this doesn't have to be weight bearing.
Yeah.
It's not going to get thrown around. It goes in my sword bag and it fits very snugly in the sword bag, so it doesn't bounce around. It's just a way to secure the miniatures, because I was looking at all the stuff I have. One of the things I've run into, and maybe every gamer runs into this, I've been doing this hobby now for 10 or 12 years, and I've gotten to the point where I'm not really interested in buying too much more stuff on the miniature side. For the most part, for the games that I play, I have the miniatures that I want. There's still a few things hanging out there, like for Dystopian Wars, some of the later models, like for the FSA and the French, that I would love to get my hands on. So I check eBay every once in a while. Star Wars Legion, I've got enough models for that game that I could field the entire Galactic Civil War and the entire war simultaneously the entire war between the Separatists and the Grand Army of the Republic on my own, right? So I'm not really in need of models. What I am in need of is organization, storage space, transport capability, things like that. I don't want to spend the money on a new bag, and I didn't want to spend, I did the math. Those pluck foam trays to fit my bag are anywhere from, I think, $13 to $18 a piece, depending on how thick they are. So I was like, hey, let me just build my own. And so I started building my own, and it works. And I am very happy because it gets rid of this pluck foam I have laying around.
Yeah.
And it gives me a way to store this stuff.
Right? Yeah.
Yep, exactly. I'm upcycling, exactly. So I'll get off my soapbox now. Sorry to take up so much time.
Well, Greg, you know what this reminds me of? I had a extra plastic tote when I first started into wargaming. And I converted that into miniature storage for some of my Battlefleet Gothic stuff by making cardboard trays and using some recycled egg crate foam. I forgot where I had it from.
Perfect.
Yeah, but it's still working almost. It's 2022, so about 16 years later, it's still going strong.
Perfect. And it cost you pennies on the dollar to make it, right? So I mean, every little bit. I mean, this is not the most expensive hobby in the world, but it ain't cheap. Miniature prices do go up, and so every little bit you can save is, more tiny soldiers or ships or airplanes you can buy. So,
or a new rule supplement or more dice. I mean,
exactly.
There's always something you can buy, right?
Exactly. So so maybe Andy, I may send you some pictures of these, and it's been so long since I posted any pictures on the forum. If you want to throw a couple of pictures in there of what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah,
people can see. But yeah, it's a very simple thing. Like I said, go to your local Home Depot or probably Lowe's. I go to Home Depot because it's closer. Look in the Hobbywood section, and they'll have something like this probably. And like I said, 2 foot by 4 foot section yielded me nine rectangles, and then some extra pieces that just weren't the right size. But I still got it because I paid for it. I'll use those for basing terrain pieces or whatever down the road. So so between that and painting a little bit of Star Wars Legion, that's pretty much all I've done. On the other side, I'm finishing up hopefully here soon. It's taken me a lot longer to get through this than it should have. I'm finishing up a book called Asian Armageddon by Peter Harmson. It's the third book in a trilogy on the Second World War in the Pacific. So obviously there's probably 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 trilogies on the
Turns
Pacific
out
theater.
People write about that particular war an awful lot. So.
They do. The reason I read this one, so Ian Toll's trilogy, which you all know I absolutely loved, focused a lot more. It was almost exclusively on the U.S. side of things, and it focused a lot more on, for lack of a better term, the carrier campaign. So he didn't talk much about MacArthur in New Guinea or in the Philippines. Or the Philippines was discussed some, but so this guy, the selling point for this trilogy, the reason I picked it up, and each of these books is only like 180 pages. They're not very long. He was also going to cover, or he said he was going to cover in these books, what was going on in the China theater as well, between the Japanese and the Chinese. And to some extent he did. but I felt like he also spent way too much time covering other things that other authors had covered better, right? So he had a whole chapter and a half or so on Midway. It's like, dude, I don't need that. There's that's been done, right? The reason I picked your trilogy up is because I wanted to see more of what was going on in the Chinese theater, what war was going on with the Japanese in the far Western Pacific, during the early parts of the war, that gets overlooked a lot of times because of, things like Midway and Guadalcanal and everything else. And he does have some of that. And I have learned some about some of that side of the conflict, which is, to me, that's pretty fascinating. But it wasn't as much as I had hoped, especially not in the second book. The first and third books have quite a bit. The second book doesn't have very much at all. And maybe there was just a lull in the actions there, or there wasn't anything interesting going on. I don't know. I don't know that much about that theater.
Yeah, no. So yeah, that's sort of disappointing to hear. I would say definitely look into Frank's. I actually mentioned this the last time we recorded, I think, but Richard Frank has a new trilogy he started. The first book is called Tower of Skulls, and
I have it, yeah, and I saw that you would finish it. I'm interested to hear what you think about it because I have not read it yet.
Yeah,
I'm probably going to wait until at least the second book is out, and then they're big. For those of you at home who haven't seen them, these are like door stoppers. They're pretty big.
Yeah.
But I mean, you're right, Andy. A lot of people have written, single books or trilogies or things like that. This one just, I picked it up because I wanted to see that side of the conflict. And like I said, I have learned some. I definitely have learned some about this, about the fighting on the Asian landmass itself, but it hasn't been as much as I had wanted. And like I said, he spent too much time trying to cover other major events like Guadalcanal and Midway and things like that other authors like Ian Toll and others, John Costello, have done, I think better. But anyway, so I'm finishing that up. I'm not sure what I'm going to read next. My personal reading has kind of been impacted a lot here recently by work because I've been doing a lot of reading for stuff for work. It's just the nature of my job. And sometimes when I get home, I don't want to pick a book up. So I end up not reading. Other than that, I saw that you'd watched the Kenobi series. I'll be interested to hear what you think about that. I'll have some discussion points. I'm all caught up now on Andor. Holy crap, what a good show. Holy cow, what a good show.
I've heard it's really good. I have not had a chance to sit down and watch it yet. It's been so far behind. And, since I've gotten back, it's been lots and lots of stuff going on.
Do not judge it by the first episode, not even by the first two episodes, because it is definitely a slow burn.
Yeah.
But the payoff is worth it. It is, I think, of the 4 live action Star Wars shows that Disney has done, this one is head and shoulders above The Mandalorian. And I love The Mandalorian. I thought that was a really good show, and I still do. But this one, I think, is head and shoulders above it. And it's also a very different show. This is, you kind of get this from the preview, so this is not really giving anything away. But this almost feels like a World War II resistance movie is what you're watching.
Yeah.
If you pull the Imperials out and replaced them with Nazis, you pull the TIE fighters out and replaced them with ME-109s, it would look exactly the same. But the acting is well done. The set pieces are well done. The acting is actually really good from a bunch of actors that aren't very well known, I don't think. Diego Luna obviously is really well, but the supporting cast is great. And Stellan Skarsgård, as usual, is incredibly good. So that's all I'll say about that.
Let me ask you this question. Having seen the series, does it change anything about how you view the Rogue One movie?
No, not yet. Because
I guess because now you've gotten all the background and details about sort of one of the key characters. I didn't know if it made the events of Rogue One feel more impactful or not. Basically,
not yet, because and that I think is the strength of this. They are playing this out slowly. So like there was a big thing. I think there's going to be 12 episodes. Episode 6 just came out this past week. There was a kind of the big thing that everything else had been leading towards happened this week. So I'm not really sure where they're going to go from there. But even at this point, Andor he's not the Cassian Andor that we knew in Rogue One. I'll just put it that way. So there's a lot of room for him to develop, and I think that they're if they keep up with this pacing, they're kind of teasing it out slowly, which I'm fine with. There's no reason to have everything all rushed and him, all of a sudden going from what he was to, what we saw him in Rogue One. There are several years to that journey, I think, because I think this is set 5 or 6 years before the events of Rogue One.
Yeah.
But it's good. It is good. It really is. So anyway, I'll look forward to hearing your thoughts on it whenever you get around to watching it. So all right, that's it for me. I've waxed a little long here. Sorry, I was bragging about my hobby project, but like I said, folks, I'm but a simple man. I don't have that many creative ideas, and so when I do, I really got to capitalize on them. So I'm very happy with how this little tray project worked out. So because I'm going to end up being able to create dozens of trays because I have a lot of pluck foam for 95% less of what I would have had to pay for if I was going to buy these straight from Battle Foam. That's nothing against Battle Foam; they put out a good product, and I'm still using their product. This is all their pluck foam. But anyway, it's just I'm just happy with how it turned out. So, all right, Andy, what have you been up to?
All right, Greg. Well, there has been a fair bit of stuff I did over deployment that I'll talk about only briefly. So while I was on deployment, I got through a few books. I got through Tower of Skulls. I did finish reading that one because I'd only started when we talked.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Greg, it sounds like from your discussion, your mention of, doorstop style books that you have the physical hard copy of this book?
I do. Yep, I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So because I was taking it with me on deployment, I actually have the Kindle version.
Mm.
And normally I say that I prefer to have my nonfiction in hardback.
Yeah.
There was some advantages to having this book on Kindle. I don't know, Greg, if you have Amazon Prime or watch shows on Amazon Prime,
yep.
and you have the X-ray for shows where it'll tell you like who's in the scene, maybe something about the background music or trivia about that, that type of thing. Well, they have X-ray for books now, not all books, but some books. And they have X-ray for this book, which means that if you see General Nakamura and you can't remember who he was because he was first mentioned 2 chapters ago, you can highlight his name and it brings up a summary of who the guy is and like what units he was in command of and this type of thing.
Wow.
It's sort of like an instant lookup for that type of stuff. And I found it to be immensely useful when I was going through this book.
Okay, so here's my question. So who is writing up those little summaries about those things? Is that something the author has done for this, or is it something that an editor has done? Or
most of the time, it just links to the Wikipedia page for that.
Okay.
Right, which is good enough to be a memory jogger for like, oh yeah, I remember when we talked about this guy. He was in charge of the 31st Regiment in Shanghai in 1937 or whatever.
Right, yeah, perfect.
Because there's a lot of that stuff going on in this book.
Yes.
Because it starts in the 30s, works its way up into I think it was early 42, basically.
Yeah.
Once the real start of World War II, when the Americans entered the war and Japan, sort of unleashed hell on the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, right? So.
Yes. Yeah. I'm with you. I tend to prefer a physical version, whether it's hard or softback for my history books, because what I've run into, I've listened to a few. I actually listened to the first 2 of Ian Toll's books.
Yeah.
On Audible, and I did all 3 of Rick Atkinson's Liberation trilogy on Audible. And the audio, and it's great. The audiobooks are great, but kind of like what you said, a lot of times I listen to audiobooks when I'm driving or when I'm working on models or whatever, and it's like, shoot, I know that name.
Right. Yeah.
And for me, if I'm reading a physical book, I can be like, oh yeah, the book was I only had about 3/4 of an inch of it read. So let me go back to around that. Oh yeah, I see what they're talking about this. Oh yeah, shoot. Okay, this is 2 pages. Oh yeah, got it. Boom.
Or
Because
it's
I can
easier
remember.
just like put your finger in the page and flip back to the index or the notes and find it there. Yeah.
And you can't do that at all. Nothing like that on Audible, obviously. So.
And you really can't do it very well on a Kindle book. At least it feels clunky to me to do it that way. However, being able to just long hold, click, and highlight a word and get a summary or a definition of it.
Yeah.
Very handy, very handy. So I found that actually worked out pretty well. And
so I do kind of a poor man's version of that. A lot of times when I read these books, I read them with my iPad next to me so I can look at a map of like, okay, what does New Guinea look like, right? Exactly. Where is this in relation to, or I'll do this thing myself. I'll be my own X-ray. I'll okay, Yamashita, throw his name in the internet and see whatever.
Yeah. And having a map open next to you is actually something that's very helpful with this book as well.
Okay.
There are maps
Noted.
in it, but they don't have a map on every page, and there's lots of granular discussion about specific geographical movements of various units. Basically, he gets down to about the I would say probably the regimental level
Okay.
for troop movements, which is still pretty granular when you're talking about an entire theater. And that's
Yes.
part of the reason why the book is so long, because there's a lot of things like the 33rd and the 57th and the 82nd Regiment all landed at this bay on the coast of the Malaysian Peninsula on this date and advanced east to the town of whatever the heckville. That type, there's a lot of that type of thing in there, right? So, but there's also plenty of discussion about the higher level political and military leadership stuff going on, both for China and Japan especially. There's a little bit of that discussion for the British, but to be honest with you, the British don't really play until about the last quarter of the book, because up until that point, it's all about the Japanese fighting the Chinese mostly.
Right.
And so it's not until that last quarter of the book that you really get into the post December 7th type of thing. And to be honest with you, the Americans and the British don't really come off very well in this book. It's lots of laziness, incompetence, and complacency, as one might expect, given the historical result.
Well, I mean, we were we were on our heels. I mean, there was the whole ABDA thing that just didn't work, and we tried, but it didn't work, and
There's some discussion about that. There's some discussion about the failed British defense of Singapore, Force D, the loss of the Philippines. All of that gets touched on in this first book. So there's a lot of underestimating and overestimating of the right and wrong things, and just plain racism as well.
Yes, that too. Yep, exactly.
And not just in terms of the Japanese, but also in terms of the various indigenous peoples that the British and the Americans were fighting with. I mean, there's some interesting discussion about the Filipino regiments that the Americans had and the Indian regiments that the British had, and how they were used and misused and misunderstood and that type of thing.
And I would say a fair amount of hubris that goes along with it. When you look at some people like MacArthur at the very beginning, right? So So how he was. So how did you like the book overall? Was it well written? Did you feel like it flowed well?
It's not a edge of your seat page turner thriller, but I found it very interesting, and I found it well written and understandable. Like, I didn't feel like I was getting super lost in any of it.
Right.
So it covers a lot of detail, covers a lot of ground, both figuratively and literally in terms of geography that it's covering, but it does it in such a way that you can still track what's going on. It's still all understandable. So highly recommend it. Very, very much looking forward to the second volume of the trilogy. I'm honestly not sure when that's due out. Hopefully in the next year or so. I look forward to
and I learned this with Atkinson's books and with Ian Toll's books. Ian Toll wrote the Pacific War trilogy. I think Pacific Crucible came out in 2012, and Twilight of the Gods came out in 2020. So, but they were very heavily researched. They were very well done books. But you're talking an 8-year span, so you may be waiting a little while for the sequel for this one.
It's possible. I can probably find it on Google, but.
And the reason I was asking too is that I've never read any of Richard B. Frank's books. I've got a couple of his actually. I picked up some at a used bookstore up in Idaho a couple of years ago, before he released the Tower of Skulls book, or I think around the same time. I didn't realize it was the same author until I got home. I saw him on my shelf, and I was like, "Oh, hey, it's the same guy."
Yeah.
And I've got his book on Guadalcanal that was written, I think, back in the 80s or the 90s or something like that. So.
Oh yeah. All right. Well, anyway, so I also got through a new book that I bought right before I deployed, How the War Was Won by Phillips O'Brien. Now, Greg, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of this book or not. I hadn't until somebody on a Discord I'm a member of mentioned it. This is a fascinating high-level macroeconomic analysis of World War II. This book was partly written in response to some of the pro-Russian revisionists out there that want to say that, the contributions of the Americans and the British were very, very minor in the defeat of Nazi Germany, and it was all about the Eastern Front, and that was the only theater that really mattered, etc. And this book goes into some really interesting detail about why that is not really true, and how things like the bomber offensive, which can oftentimes be looked at as a bit of a failure when you look at it from the perspective of what its original objectives were, actually had a lot to do with the reason why Germany was so weakened and unable to finally defeat the Soviets and knock them out of the war. So, for example, Greg, by I think 43, maybe early 44, the Germans had something like 1 or 1.5 million people, workers, whose only job it was to repair bomb damage to factories.
Holy cow.
That was like, they weren't doing anything else productive except going through and repairing bomb damage. Something like 2/3 of all the concrete that was being produced in Germany was being used for things like those giant flak towers for anti-air defenses. More than 2/3 of German aircraft production stayed in Germany and France as those all fighters to try and defeat the bombing offensive in the air. All of these things meant that those people and those aircraft, that material was not on the Eastern Front fighting the Soviets, and that's because of the bomber offensive,
Right.
Things like that.
No, I've not heard of that book, Andy, but I'm definitely going to add that to my list, because that's so. And I think I've talked about that in some of the other discussions we've had about this topic. Our listeners know I love studying World War II. It's one of my favorite periods to study, specifically the Asia Pacific theater. But the older I get, the more I want to read about things that are not the norm. When you think about World War II in the Pacific, you think about the Carrier Offensive. Got it. Read it. Toll's books were great, but I think I told you last winter I read War at the End of the World about MacArthur and New Guinea. Not a very heavily covered topic. I've read books. I've read Bruce Campbell's books on Rabaul. Fascinating books. But a very important part of the theater, but it was way off at the corner someplace, and it wasn't the American carriers and Task Force 58 charging across the Central Pacific.
Right.
So as I get older and I learn more about, and I start to care more about, things like the logistics of fighting wars, and especially something as large as World War II, this book sounds incredible to me. The other thing, and I'll be very brief on this because it's a little bit of a tangent. This is something that has kind of come to my attention in reading the books I've read about the Pacific Theater. It really has started to kind of hit home to me as a consumer of this history, and the more I delve into it, hindsight's 20/20. But after 1944, you could make the argument, maybe by the midpoint of 1944, maybe even sooner in some cases, you could make the argument, looking at what happened, that there was no way that Japan was going to win. There was no way that Germany was going to win, but they drug it out, and they drug it out, and they drug it out, which means that, especially on the Japanese side, probably hundreds of thousands of their citizens died in arms that didn't need to. And on the German side as well. Of course, the Brits and the Russians and the United States and others all lost a lot of men that for a war that by that point had pretty much been decided, but the leadership in those countries would not give up. And again, hindsight's 20/20. You weren't in their shoes. I'm not in their shoes. I don't know what was going on in their war councils, but some of the things that we've unearthed now about how especially like in the Japanese high command, they knew that things were going poorly, but they refused to stop fighting. And it's like you read about these battles in the Pacific where, and I can't remember which one, it might have been Tinian or what, I can't remember which one now it was, but I just read about it in this book I'm reading right now. And there was something like 36,000 Japanese soldiers were killed, and something like 850 U.S. Marines and soldiers were killed, and that was it. And they were wiped out to a man. And it didn't have to happen. That by that point, there was no way the Japanese were going to win. So it just, and I know, again, hindsight being 20/20 and all that, we have the benefit of 75, 80 years looking back on this stuff, but it almost breaks my heart. I'm not trying to sound wishy-washy, but it almost breaks my heart to read some of this, because it's like, how many of those people died that didn't have to die? Why did their leaders not say, okay, we give up? And I know why, and there's a lot, it's not really that simple, but it's heartbreaking almost to see that it had to go to the levels it did because nobody surrendered, and there's probably, doctoral level dissertations you could do on this sort of thing. I'm just looking at it from my own little point of view, but does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And so with how the war was won, he does touch upon, so he goes through and he focuses on sort of the four main combatants: US, Great Britain, Japan, and Germany, and USSR, of course. And he talks a little bit about the senior leadership of each country, mainly from the perspective, though, of what they were producing and why. Not so much about why they were fighting. He doesn't really get into that so much. He's much more focused on, here's what each country built in terms of stuff, tanks and planes and ships, and here's why they did that. And here's maybe the pros and cons of the approach they took. And out of that comes some interesting analysis, in that pretty much all the major powers were spending far more resources on aircraft than they were on ships and other naval units, and far more than that than they were on land units, really with the exception of the USSR, naturally. It's just, partly because that stuff was that much more expensive, but also arguably it was that much more important. And then another interesting insight, and then I'll move on because we've sort of anchored on this book largely.
Yes. Sorry.
Another insight that came out of this book was that non-battlefield losses became one of the big determinants of sort of the irreversible decline for Japan and Germany. Something like I want to say that by the end of the war, only 1 out of every 4 or so aircraft Japan was producing was actually making it to the front lines. The other 3 were all lost in training accidents or were lost in long ferry routes where they were flying these large hops from the home islands out to one of the island outposts. And the pilots weren't very well trained. Navigation instruments were rudimentary at best, and they were getting lost and just never being seen again because they got lost and crashed at sea. Or they had a mechanical failure because the aircraft was brand new, hadn't had all of the bugs worked out of the engine or whatever, and it was conking out on them, and they were forced to, ditch, all this type of stuff. And so, that became even more of an important sort of drain on overall strength than actual battlefield losses, which, we think about massive battles like Kursk, for example, and in all actuality, less than about a month's worth of production for both the Russians and the Germans was lost in that battle. In other words, a month after Kursk, they had as many tanks and as many field guns and as many whatever else as they had before the battle, because their production was keeping up with that. However, when you start bombing an entire train of tanks in Germany before it even gets out of the country, right, now you're starting to have a major impact because those tanks never even got to the front line. So,
right. Yeah.
Anyway.
It's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just looked it up on my phone. I will definitely put that one on my list. Thanks for adding to my reading list, Andy. I really appreciate it.
It has a tendency when we have these conversations to happen. Yeah.
It does.
Anyway, one more book that I got through this time was an audible book, an audio book, Match Game, which is the most recent Expeditionary Force book. This is the penultimate X-Force book. This was book 14. Book 15 is going to be the final book, and that's actually due out in December. So that's coming up pretty quick.
Man,
really
he cranked those books out in a hurry.
He does. Yeah, he's been averaging like 2 or 3 a year.
Yeah, and they're not bad books. I mean, you might think
they're fun.
Yeah, you might think with that level of production, so to speak, they wouldn't be very good. But I listened to the first 4 or 5. I thought they were pretty good.
Oh yeah. So that was a lot of fun. Now, as far as modeling and gaming, I've only been back for about a month now, and I haven't really gotten any tabletop gaming in. Been doing a little bit of video gaming, playing some of the. I've actually been going back and playing some more of the Battlefield Gothic video game. And then I also got a Steam Deck, the new handheld device from Valve that runs on a version of Linux. And I've been playing some various Steam games from my library on that thing, having a lot of fun with that.
Cool.
Modeling. So I've sort of bought into Horus Heresy because there's a group out here in my area of Virginia that's really big into it. So, it's my friend's into it and his friends are into it. So it'll be sort of a ready-made player base for me on that.
So this is Warhammer 30K, right?
Yeah, Warhammer 30K, as how they call it.
Yeah.
And interestingly, the rules for the game are more in tune with like 3rd through 7th edition of the game, right? Because basically 3rd edition through 7th edition of 40K, it's sort of like the Spartan games, right? They varied in their details here and there, but in general, it was the same basic game, right? And same thing with 40K. And the jump from 7th edition to 8th edition was kind of like the jump from Spartan to War Cradle, where it was thematically the same game, but the rules and the mechanics were very different, right? So this is a hearkening back to me because I really cut my teeth in 40K in 5th edition. And this brings back a lot of the things that used to be in the game, like scatter dice and template weapons and all this type of stuff that's no longer in modern 40K, basically. So
I've got some friends out here that are pretty big into 30K, and they really enjoy it because maybe it's just the player base here or at Adepticon, but it's seen as much more relaxed, and more thematic than standard 40K games are. At least that's the impression I've gotten from talking to them. So
and then I've also been working on some of my minis for the Polyversal game. I actually got these minis a few years ago, but I finally got my hands on the actual box game with the printed rule book and all of the unit tiles and the tokens and all those goodies. And that means that I'm now excited about getting that game to the table. So I started painting up my little 6mm infantry and the 1-inch tall walkers and all that type of stuff. Yeah, so
cool.
Good times.
Very cool.
Right. Basically, they're up to the assembled and primed stage. So now I actually have to do the easy part, which is the actual painting, right? So,
yeah, really. Yeah. At that scale, good grief. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's pretty easy. Base coat, wash, dry brush, and you're pretty much done with a little bit of detailing.
Pretty much, right? Pretty much.
Anyway, so there's that. And then I've also been working on some spaceship models. This is a mixture of brigade model stuff and some stuff from 0 Hour Games, which the Ryan Wolf, the guy behind that company, he does really efficient Kickstarters where he runs like a 1 or 2 week campaign, and then you have your little ship miniature and the poster that has the deck plans to go with it for use in RPGs like Pathfinder or Starfinder or whatever. He has that stuff mailed out to you within a week or two after the campaign ends. So it's like a month from start to finish.
I think I've seen several of those. That's the one where there's like the model of the ship, you said, and then there's like a big play map that's the interior of the ship.
Yeah, it's a poster. It's like a standard size poster. Yeah,
those are pretty.
And they're fun little ship designs. And so I have like 6 or 7 of these things that I've backed over the last couple of years, and I'm just getting around to getting them like painted and stuff. I plan to sort of use them as like generic civilian vessels for things like A Billion Suns and whatnot. So
I wonder if you could, Andy, if you had enough of those, if you had like maybe 5 or 6 of them, if you could play, I'm always trying to think of silly stuff like this. If they would be big enough for you to play a game of Star Wars Legion, where you'd still have, whatever, like the 3 infantry units and the special forces or whatever, but you'd have them divided up on 4 or 5 different ships. So instead of having all 1,000 points on both sides on one ship, because I think those posters are too small, you might have like 1 or 2 units on each ship. And it's like a boarding action going on several ships at the same time. Do you think they'd be big enough to support that?
Most of the ships, I would say, are probably big enough to do like squad on squad.
Okay.
And some of the larger ones might be able to do 20 to 30 models, but that'd probably be pushing it. And you'd want to stick mainly with infantry, of course. You're not going to be able to get an ATST through one of these things. So
right, yeah, definitely. Yeah. I just a thought, because I'm always trying to think of interesting settings for that game, and
right.
And all right, cool. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, Greg, you should pick yourself up a copy of the old Games Workshop supplement for Battlefield Gothic called Invasion, which is all about how you could do like 40K boarding actions on starships. So it's pretty interesting.
I'd like for that.
Anyway, finally thing we talked about a little bit already, Obi-Wan. I did actually, what I did is I downloaded those episodes onto my iPad during a port visit and watched them underway. And I gotta say, I liked it. I didn't think it was as good as The Mandalorian. I thought it was better than Boba Fett. I liked it. It gave us what I think we probably as fans wanted to see, which is more, Darth Vader being a badass in a suit.
Yes.
And did the show really need to exist? Probably not. Was it a fun watch? Yeah, I thought so. I liked it a lot.
The voice modulation that they did for Vader during that fight when his helmet got cracked.
Yes.
Hayden Christensen obviously has come a long way as an actor, but that was particularly well done, and the violence of that duel, especially at the end in that last episode, that was really is cathartic the right word? It was good to see that between those two, because you really got a sense of how personal it was, at least on Vader's side.
Yeah.
Kenobi kind of seemed like I don't want anything to do with this, but he kind of got sucked in. The one moment for me, I agree with you. I think that kind of between The Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett, although I did like both those shows, having watched all the Clone Wars, and if you're going to get into it, you're going to get into it, right? And you understand the backstory of the characters. Kenobi, for those of you who have watched the Clone Wars, if you haven't, go out and watch it. It's really good. At this point in his career, I mean, he's been through it.
Yeah.
He almost died 3 or 4 times during the Clone Wars. He saw thousands and thousands of clones killed on the battlefield. He saw Jedi killed on the battlefield. He lived through Order 66 and the betrayal of the Emperor, all that stuff. And that, I think if you know that, it kind of informs how you look at him in this show.
Yeah.
And the one scene, Andy, that really got to me was in that second episode where he gets off the transport and whatever that neon planet was, and there's that clone trooper there on the sidewalk begging for handouts. And I was like, oh my gosh, that would be horrible for him to see, because he'd led those guys in battle on how many dozens and dozens of worlds.
Yeah.
And to see this poor broken clone still wearing part of his armor, looking for handouts. And I also thought it was nice that they got Tamura Morrison for that 30 seconds.
Yeah.
But that, I mean, do you get what I mean? That was in a show that wasn't stellar. I thought that was kind of a powerful moment, to me anyway.
Yeah, no, there's definitely some good moments in it. I just think that, and overall, some of the narrative that they were going for didn't quite land the way they hoped it for, I think. So
yeah, it was a little uneven.
Yeah.
But some really cool Vader scenes, and some really cool Vader being the evil Darth Vader that he really was kind of scenes. So yeah, that was good.
Yeah, I was wandering through a town, murdering the townspeople for no reason. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, really. So anyway.
Oh, man. All right. Well, anyway, that about does it for me, Greg. I think we've covered enough there.
Yes. Yes, definitely. So, Andy, why don't you walk us through the community SITREP here? I haven't been on in quite a while, to be honest. Again, just real life stuff has kind of kept me away. But so what's been going on with the community?
Yeah, well, so I've been sorting through the forums since I've gotten back. I really didn't have the ability or the time even to go through the forum posts much when I was away. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to focus mostly on what's been going on the last month or so. Before I get to that, I do want to say that now that I am back, I am trying to get the content posting engine started back up for Man Battle Stations. So while I was underway, I did have the opportunity to spend a little time drafting up some blog posts that I just basically need to edit, add links to, get some pictures for, and then post up on the blog. So those should be coming soon-ish. I'm also looking to try and get the Man Battle Stations YouTube channel back up and running. Hoping to get a couple of videos going up on that. And Greg, on that note, I'm a little worried that I might have painted myself into a little bit of a corner, because we've actually gotten about 100 or so subscriptions to the Man Battle Stations YouTube channel. But I think that's partly due to the fact that I put up a few how to play videos for Dystopian Wars. And so I'm worried that people out there think this is a Dystopian Wars only channel, and that's really not the intent. So hopefully I don't upset too many people when I start talking about things that aren't Dystopian Wars, but we'll see.
Right.
And then, of course, the podcast. The podcast is back, obviously, since you're listening to this episode, and we're hoping to keep that going. I've got some great topics lined up. We'll talk a little bit more about that during our special announcement phase at the end of the episode. Okay, on to the forums. So Yorkshire Gamer, our good friend Ken, has got a new project started. He's doing a 1/700 scale naval project where he's got a selection of 1/700 scale ships that he is building and painting up with the intention of using them as gaming pieces. Doing a great job on the painting so far as well. He's got some really pretty pictures posted up on the forums. Greg, I got to admit, this is something I have toyed with myself because there is a pretty good selection of 700 scale ship models out there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if you've ever looked at it or not.
I have, yep.
Maya, of course, makes a fair few of them. There's some trumpeter models. Basically, 1/700 has sort of become one of the common model building scales for display models for ships, that and 1/350th. And so it only makes sense then that if you can get enough ships to play a game with, you could, do that at 1/700 scale.
Right.
I always thought it'd be fun to do as like a convention spectacle type game.
Yeah.
I'm not sure yet exactly which way Ken's going to go with his game, but I look forward to seeing it. Speaking of large scale games, Mad Dr. B is back active on the forums after a little bit of a time away. So Greg's our good friend, Aaron, of course, and it's good to see him posting again.
I have lost many Dystopian Wars games to Aaron many years ago, but I think that the final record between the two of us was much more in his favor than mine. So
many well spent afternoons down at that game store in Fredericksburg. For sure.
The Game Vault, Game Vault.
Anyway, he's got a post up with a link to his blog where he ran a large scale Dreadfleet game at Nova Open. Which is something that is definitely worth checking out.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of large-scale convention spectacle games.
Yes.
And
yeah,
finally,
pictures,
And then finally, Easy-E has a new battle report up for Aeronautica Imperialis. He's running sort of a little narrative campaign with that, and he's got a battle post up. And of course, Greg, he is using the original edition of the rules for that, which is also the copy I happen to have. Which is, having played both now, you can definitely see the lineage, but there are some significant differences, specifically with the new version you're playing on a hex map. And so you no longer have little maneuver cards that you lay down on the table to help you figure out how your Immelman turn works or something like that, right?
I still have not played that game, even though I have a couple of $100 worth of models. So here's what happened. So back in the middle of August, I went over to a friend Stefan's house, and a bunch of us in the little game group we have out here in Colorado along the Front Range. We all got together at his place, and I had enough models to run 2 games simultaneously because I had 2 of the starter sets. And so I had read the rules, and I decided I wasn't going to play. I was going to help people play the game, and I was going to jump in later. And about, about an hour after I got there, I realized I'd sucked down 3 glasses of water, and I was coughing. And my throat was feeling bad, and so I was like, guys, I'm gonna break contact here and go home just to be safe. And 2 days later, I tested positive for COVID. So so I still have not. That was my whole COVID bout. So I still have not played the stupid game. I've seen it on the table with my own models. They're not painted yet. It looked a lot of fun. Everybody who plays it was a lot of fun, but I still have not actually moved airplanes around yet. So looking forward to doing it at some point.
They are very pretty models.
They are. I mean, you can say what you want to about GW, but you cannot fault them on the quality of their models. It is incredible, especially the orc fighters. And I love how you have the options to make them all look different. Even though they're the same stats, just they visually different. It's really neat.
Well, I mean, that's the thing about the orcs, right? No 2 pieces of orc equipment should ever be identical because everything is custom built. Well, I say built, custom slapped together by some mad mech, but
exactly. Yeah.
Same difference.
Yep.
Anyway, so that about wraps up for the forums. Nothing really else to mention as far as the blog or the YouTube channel yet. Hope to have more news about that during our next community SITREP. So stay tuned. And just a quick plug as always for the Etsy store. If you're looking for some Man Battle Station swag, then head on over. There's still plenty of dice and buttons available.
The dice have failed me before, but all dice fail me, so I don't think that's specific to the Man Battle Station's dice. So I need to find. There's a war game out there somewhere where you got to roll 1s, 2s, and 3s to do well, and I need to find that game and just play that. So anyway.
All righty. Well, anyway, so that will do it for the SITREP. So now it's time to move on to the new releases section. Now, Greg, I know that you've probably been paying only some moderate attention to these types of things, and it's been a long time. And this is one of those situations where we can get really bogged down trying to rattle off every single thing. So I've got like 2 or 3 big mentions that I wanted to put out. And then if you have anything, I'll turn it over to you. Okay.
I have one that I saw that you didn't have listed here, so I'll save my power for that one.
Okay. So War Cradle has just put up pre-orders for a brand new Dystopian Wars starter set between the basically the Prussians and the Britannians. You know what the Imperium and the Crown, as they call it in the new version. And what's interesting about this one is that it's airship focused. It has small, medium, and large airships in it. So you could, out of this box, have the units you need to field a air fleet. And these are all multi-part plastics. You can do lots of modular options, whether you wanted a carrier or a carrier Zeppelin or like a battleship Zeppelin. You've got all the parts you need to make either or. So the models, I think, look pretty nice, and it's definitely worth looking into, especially if you have been on the fence about Dystopian Wars 3.0 so far, because as a 2-player starter set, this box does carry the cards and the rule book and the templates and the dice and all that sort of stuff. Now, if, like me, you have already jumped into Dystopian Wars 3.0, this box may not be for you. However, if the pattern holds that War Cradle has maintained all through this past year or so, all of these models will be coming in separate boxes probably next month. And they're probably going to do the October pre-order for the big 2-player box set, and then all of the models be available in their own box sets without having to rebuy the rules and dice and things that you already have enough of, so you can just get to the models that you really want. So more follow on that. Looking forward to seeing those. I'll probably pick up some of the Prussian, the Imperium areas, because they look pretty cool.
This is Sturginium Skies is the name of this box.
Skies. Yep, that's.
I'm looking at it now. So yeah, cool.
Yeah. Real briefly, Warlord Games has been putting out some new units for Victory at Sea, mostly merchants and auxiliaries, which is interesting. Honestly, I'm just glad to see that they're still continuing to support the game and continuing to put out some new units for folks to buy. That's exciting. And then it's already passed, but the Kickstarter for the Leviathans game has come and gone, which I'm super excited about. I've actually bought into that probably more than I should have, but I couldn't help myself. So the ship date for that stuff isn't for another year. They gave themselves a whole year to do the fulfillment. And if Kickstarter's taught me anything, it's that things tend to take a little bit longer than you expect. But I'm still looking forward to that. That'll be something that, end of 23, we'll be talking a little bit more about on the show, I'm sure. So
yeah, I was really tempted to buy that one, but I just, back to my comments from earlier, I've got so much stuff that I'm really working more on organizing stuff. And so I think what I'm going to do is if somebody out here, a couple of our folks in our game group out here pledged for it. So I'm going to play it with them. And if I like it, I'll get into it. If not, that's okay. So
perfectly understandable. Yeah. I still have the old 2-player box set of that game that I bought back in like 2012. So yeah. And the old ships will still be compatible with the new game, which is the exciting part. So
awesome.
And then speaking of crowdfunding, there's a Flick Fleets expansion that funded on GameFound. They switched it from Kickstarter to GameFound, and it's introducing some new races to the game, which is exciting, and opening up the possibility to do a 4-player game, which I'm excited about because I've introduced this to family and friends, and even the non-gamery ones, and they've all really enjoyed the game. And so now you can get like 4-player chaos going.
I was going to say, that sounds like mayhem.
Yeah, it does. I can't wait. I'm hoping to have it in time to take back to Indiana around the holidays to show everybody. So
nice.
But yeah, so that'll about do it for me on the sort of the big highlights for the new products, announcements, releases. Greg, how about you? What you got?
Yeah, the only thing that I saw, and this really tempted me, but again, going back to what I said before, I'm trying not to get into a bunch of new stuff. I'm trying to kind of use the stuff I've got and update it and everything else and organize it. TT Combat has released a new 2-player box set, 2-player starter set for Drop Fleet Commander.
Oh,
With a
yes.
couple of new ships. Yep, this is the UCM against the I can't remember the name of that alien race. It's the one with the real
Shaltari?
wavy, not the Shaltari. I don't think it's the one with the real
Scourge.
wavy.
Yeah, the Scourge.
Yeah, the real wavy looking ships, really alien looking ships. So
Yeah.
they've tossed a couple of new models in there, I think. Man, I still absolutely love those models, especially the UCM and there's another the PHR, I think. Those ships
Yeah,
just
the
look so
post-Human
good.
Republic. Yeah.
Yeah, so and it's actually a pretty reasonable price, £60. Now with shipping, if you were going to buy it directly from them, I don't know what the shipping would work out to be to come to the U.S. But yeah, I was almost tempted, and I was tempted to almost get that, but I skipped it because, like I said, I don't need to take any new game systems right now. But yeah, head over to TT Combat's webpage if that sounds interesting to you. So and that's it.
Cool.
That's all I wanted to bring up.
All right. Yeah, I might have to look into that and then post it up on the forums just to keep everybody advised, as it were.
Yeah, I still want to try that game. We discussed the mechanics and the whole thing about the ships making noise, quote unquote, or not making noise and being harder to hit is just a fascinating mechanic to me. So I really want to try that sometime. So.
Oh yeah. So.
All right.
Well, cool. All right. Well, Greg, if that's all you got, I think that will wrap us up for the new product section.
Yep.
Which means that it's time for us to take a little break, and then we'll be back to do our little special announcement and close out the episode.
The Man Battle Stations podcast. All naval gaming, all the time.
All right, everybody, we're back. Now, as we've been teasing all episode, we do have a special announcement, and this announcement concerns the show as a whole, but it's specifically in regards to Greg. So I'm going to turn that over to him and let him take it from there. So, Greg, over to you.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, it's we don't mean to make a big deal of this, just because of a lot of things going on in real life, and because of some changes and changes in gaming habits and changes in the amount of time I have to do certain things. We decided it's probably a good idea for me to step away from the podcast for a little while, possibly permanently. Don't know. You may hear me back on every once in a while if Andy leaves the door unlocked. We'll see. but yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I've got a lot of stuff going on, outside of the gaming world, a lot of demands on my time and demands on my mental bandwidth, which, a younger version of myself would have looked at me and said, "What do you mean mental bandwidth? What are you talking about?" And now I realize that really is a thing. So there's only so many hours in the day and things like that. So yeah, so I'm going to step aside for a bit. Andy has been gracious enough to say that I can come back and sit in the chair whenever the schedule works out, and so you may hear me, all joking aside, off and on.
Your
topics.
co-host seat will always be open for you, Greg. Anytime.
Well, I appreciate that. I hope over the past how long has it been? I'm a little fuzzy on the math.
We started the show back in 2015, so it's been
Good
about 7
grief.
years. Yeah.
7 years. Well, I hope over
7
the
years
7
coming
years.
up in December. So.
Yeah, I hope over the last 7 years that my and Andy's banter back and forth has been interesting and hopefully informative and maybe even a little bit educational when it comes to naval wargaming. And Andy will say a lot on his own, and I'm sure he'll have other guests come on and talk about things.
Yeah. So, yeah, if you want, Greg, I can address that right now. So I have been reaching out to a few friends of ours that some of which have been on the show before. Rob, for example, is one of the folks I've been talking to, and I don't know yet if we're going to have a permanent co-host. Like in other words, like a 1-for-1 swap with you, Greg. But I am looking to have guest hosts on frequently, and of course, we already do a fair number of interviews. It seems like every second or third show we do is an interview anyway, so it won't be just me yammering into a microphone from here on out. There will be some other folks fairly frequently coming on the show. So no worries there. And as we've said all along, this is not a detriment for the show continuing. Definitely going to keep going. We have a list of topics that I've been working on that I definitely am looking forward to addressing in the podcast. So all of that said, Greg, it's been great having you. And I know that, it's sort of after 7 years, it probably feels weird or, like you're giving up on something. But to be honest with you, I appreciate you sticking it out and dealing with all of my, crazy madcap schemes for podcasting this long. It's really been a fun time, and like I said, I hope to have you back on the show again. So,
well, thanks, Andy, and I appreciate you. I appreciate you even approaching me with the opportunity way back in 2015. As I've said before, he is Man Battle Station actual, folks. I am just the help. So yeah. So anyway, it's been a lot of fun, and I'm sure here and there I'll poke my head in and maybe complain about the latest dice failure I had in Oak Iron or something like that, and losing a first-rate ship to a frigate and just stupid things like that, I'm sure. But anyway, but thank Andy. I do, all joking aside, I do appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun, and it's not permanent goodbye. It's just kind of stepping away, and you'll hear my voice again probably at some point. So just be
absolutely.
All right. So with that being said, Andy, what's up for the next episode?
All right. Well, for the next episode, we are going to be reviewing our forum member and previous guest, Eric Farrington's new game, Castles in the Sky, the game about flying battleships. Yeah. So this game actually came out in the middle of the summer while I was gone. So it's been a minute since it released, but, I'm on that catch-up phase right now where I'm trying to get my arms around all the cool stuff that came out while I was out at sea, right? So we're going to address that on the next episode. Not sure yet if or who the guests will be for that, for a second host, but at the very least, it will be at least me there talking about it. So
good deal. Yeah, I remember talking to Eric. We had him on whenever that was, probably almost a year ago now. And talking about that, and that's still one I may have to pick up at some point, because if nothing else, I have plenty of airships from Dystopian Wars that I could sub in and then use. Those are always some of my favorite models from the old Dystopian range, were the airships, especially the Prussian airships. They're really good. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. All right. Well, and then I want to try and get that episode out before Halloween. So that's about sometime in the next 2 weeks before the end of the month. We'll get that out.
All right. Sounds like a plan.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, Greg, I guess this is it for your final regular episode of the podcast. Any other saved rounds or any last thoughts before we close it out?
Nope. It's been a lot of fun. And again, Andy, thanks for including me on the adventure.
You're very welcome. Thanks for coming along for this far. All right. Well, as always, if you have any feedback on this episode or have a question for us, you can contact us at podcast@manbattlestations.com. You can also post in the episode thread in the MBS General Discussions Forum. You can also comment on Facebook and the Man Battle Stations blog. Lots of ways to get in touch. And if you enjoyed this episode, help us out by spreading the word. Sharing on social media and or leaving a positive review on iTunes is always greatly appreciated. And with that, it's time to bring episode 68 of the Man Battle Stations podcast to a close. Until next time, good luck and good hunting.
And roll lots of sixes.
This concludes this episode of the Man Battle Stations podcast, the podcast of naval wargaming. Please let us know what you thought of the show by emailing us at podcast@manbattlestations.com. You can also leave us a comment on the episode discussion thread in the general discussion section of the Man Battle Stations forums. The previous content is protected under a Creative Commons license and may be freely shared or remixed as long as you attribute Man Battle Stations for their efforts and are not making a commercial profit from it. These conditions can be changed if given written consent from Man Battle Stations. The music used in this episode are public domain recordings of performances by the United States Navy Band.